Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and this is the second part of a two-part interview with author Camille Griep, author of Letters to Zell and New Charity Blues. In the first episode, we discussed Letters to Zell, and in this episode, we'll be discussing her second book, New Charity Blues, as well as some of the other things she's doing as a writer, what she's working on now, etc. I mentioned in the first episode that we worked together at a Lutheran Bible camp in Montana for 2 summers, and that the second summer we were in the kitchen together. She was the head cook, and I was the assistant cook. And that second summer, we spent a lot of time together in the kitchen because we would get up at 5 in the morning to do breakfast, and then we would be in the kitchen all day preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for hundreds of campers and staff. And so we really got to know each other in some deep and meaningful ways, and I got to know her wonderful sense of humor, her intelligence, her charisma, her charm, her caring. She is a wonderful, compassionate person, and I grew to love her in that summer even more than I already did because she was my friend from the summer before. So that's my friend Camille, and she started writing books, and I now have the honor of interviewing her. So I hope you will enjoy the second part of this interview. I hope you enjoyed the first half of this interview. We do have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be discussing Camille's her second novel, New Charity Blues. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. We are speaking today with author Camille Griep about her second novel. It's called New Charity Blues. Welcome back, Camille. Thank you again for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me. New Charity Blues just came out in April. I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you about it. It's my second novel, and it is an exploration of the Trojan War from the perspectives of 2 minor female characters set in a New West dystopia, as you said. And we're looking at the characters of Cressyda and Casandra, 2 women who barely got a voice in both the Greek narratives and Shakespeare.
And so this is a much different style from your first novel, Letters to Zell. So when you're writing, how do you even decide where to start? I mean, the tone, the style, the point of view, etc. Where do you get your ideas?
So when I start writing anything, I'm usually starting with pictures, photos in my head of a character doing something, and probably to explain it, I'm always combining things. It's like cooking, say. You have a mixture of wet and dry. So let's say the dry ingredients are these photos or these images that I have in my mind, and the wet ingredients are sort of these bothersome sort of things that I want to talk about in my writing. So recently I've been trying to give voices to women's narratives I feel still haven't been fully explored. When I started with Letters to Zell, fairy tales are really low-hanging fruit. Lots of people have explored what the real story of, Goldilocks is, or the real story of Red Riding Hood. Myths are less so, and I wanted to kind of explore the concepts of family and friendship and what home really means within a framework that's not usual. And I want the books to sort of appeal to anyone who wants to see the world just a bit differently in a different frame, regardless of genre. In terms of deciding how to write the book, as woo-woo as this sounds, the narrative itself and the characters sort of make those decisions. With Zell, I started writing from Cinderella's point of view, and then I decided to write from Snow White's point of view, and then it hit me at the same time I was in my office organizing a bunch of correspondence from college and high school and camp, the camp that we worked at together.
Okay.
I thought, oh, this is how they need to tell their tale. All three of these women. It would be as if somebody sat down at my desk and started to read this correspondence. What would they find the story of these people? It's generally thought that the more points of view a book has, the harder it is to succeed. So starting out of the gate, I went with 3. And then in my second book, I backed off to 2. My editor teased me that my next one should be just 1. We're yet to see. I chose to use 2 points of view with the second book because I just couldn't manage to tell both stories from one point of view. And I felt the stories were too intimate to use the third person. That said, there's a lot of time at the beginning of a novel where a writer pokes around, writing, deleting, writing again until it feels natural and right. This takes a lot longer than one might hope. The rule is that the point of view of any scene should be from the person to whom it matters the most. But that's not always possible. I broke this rule in places in Zell and New Charity, and I broke those rules on purpose because I wanted it to be reflective of how information comes in life sometimes, which is not always in the way that it should.
So, okay, so you're writing it from these minor characters, from the Greek myth. How then did you go to this future dystopian society? How was that decision made?
In order to explore the Trojan War, I felt as if I either needed to write in the past or I needed to write in the future. The Trojan War involves a city within a wall and people who want something that city in a wall took from them. And trying to write that in a present sort of contemporary setting got even more political than I wanted. So setting it in a future dystopia, whereupon it is very, very simple to have people in want of something. And yet I could lightly touch on things like water scarcity as a political touch point. A dystopia was something that was a natural solution to what I was trying to do. I also just really love dystopias, and I wanted to try my hand at one. I remember, when I was really little, I liked to imagine what would happen if I were the last person on the world. Where would I go? What would I do? Because back then it seemed a lot less frightening. Just get on my horse and go somewhere.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of that. Very human. It's funny because there are so many dystopias out right now. It's a very, very hot genre.
Yes.
And, people would say, oh gosh, that's been done to death. Why are you doing that? But for this story, it was really the only way that made sense. In order to really focus on the characters, I needed to confine their world to a very, very quiet place. You have this quiet city and you have this quiet town, and so they get to have all the volume themselves, if that makes sense.
Yes. So for those of our listeners who haven't read it yet, can you give us just a little bit more, just a bit more of an overview of the story itself?
Sure. The story centers upon 2 communities and 2 women one in each of these communities. Cressyda we meet her in the city, which is an unnamed place, but based on Seattle. And their infrastructure has been ruined, but they are limping along. And what they don't have is water. And they are a hydroelectric powered city, and their water source has run out. And Cressyda decides to return to her hometown of New Charity. New Charity has a dam that is keeping the water from coming downstream. And Cressyda has a unique opportunity to go back to settle her father's estate. When she goes back, she meets up with Casandra and her twin, Len, who is in the Greek the Greek equivalent is Helenus. They were twins, and they had the power of foresight, and they were best childhood friends. And Casandra is coming of age in a small place, and her story is one of coming out of innocence at probably an age beyond what she should be. The two women are trying to save their own communities, and they will have obstacles put in their way. And they end up having to figure out how to save themselves as well as their communities as things are revealed to them that they did not know were happening.
So, as you mentioned, they were best childhood friends, and then Cressyda and her mother leave. This is how they end up in the city. And then whatever this catastrophe is that happens, and so they're separated from her hometown, what's left of her family, which is her father. And then this community, New Charity, becomes... Maybe talk a little bit more about that, because it is a walled community. It's a very insular community. Even though she grew up there, Cressyda has to have permission to go back after her father dies.
Yes, when the plague hits the world, the town of New Charity is somehow mysteriously immune, and so in order to keep anyone out that shouldn't be there, they close the gates to their walled city, and they don't allow anyone in who was outside when the plague broke out. Now, Cressyda gets special permission because her father had a ranch and was a respected businessman in town, and the governor of New Charity and the bishop of New Charity feel that it is diplomatically appropriate to let her in, although they have reservations about doing so. They underestimate Cressyda. They believe when the world was whole, she was a ballet dancer, and so they don't believe that she would be much of a threat in terms of, messing with the infrastructure of New Charity. But they want to make a peace offering to the residents of the city who want their water back. So it is extraordinarily political in that particular piece. Now, New Charity is holding its water in a very unique way. They've built a reservoir, which is not very inventive, but the bishop is guarding the reservoir with magic, and this isn't his own magic. It's small pieces of magic from every citizen in New Charity. So New Charity, the New Charitans are the last bastion of simple, small earth sort of magic. So somebody might be able to work wind into music, or water into fish, or earth into some sort of farming implementation. It's very small magic, but all combined. He takes it as a sacrifice, and the community agrees to use their magic to protect the water, and so it is all combined into a force that will, if liberated, will destroy the entire town. So the town is both saved and kept hostage by this magic that they've given up. And they do that in service of the spirit of the earth that they believe in.
Mm-hmm. And the spirit, I do want to talk more about the religious overtones and some more about the magic. We do have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about what you mentioned with the spirit and the magic. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I'm speaking with author Camille Griep about her book, New Charity Blues. And before the break, Camille, you were talking about the community of New Charity and this reservoir that they have built to keep the water source, which is the main reason that Cressyda goes home, because her city is without water, without power, etc. And there's this interesting mixture of magic and religion. You refer to the spirit a lot. So can you talk a little bit more about your choices that went into magic versus religion versus... I mean, it all kind of twines together, the magic, the religion, the politics.
It's very true. It's funny, my editor told me that she'd never seen a fantasy with as little magic as Charity has. And it's true, it factors in a great deal, but it's a very small part of the story. I wanted the magic and the religion to fit very tightly together. Partially, this is the concept of our gifts as people. So while, most of us aren't running around able to change, wind into music, we all have gifts that are somewhat, wondrous or almost magical. And I think organized religion can sometimes act as a pasteurization or strip down some of those things from us, almost asking for a homogenization. I think there's a huge difference between spirituality and religion, which is why the book doesn't condemn the spirit or, the possession of these gifts. But it does condemn the person who is trying to take all the gifts and hoard them. This is an allegory, to any radicalized religious movement. Being raised Lutheran, I think the concept of grace is applied across the board. And as my childhood sort of experience, I don't ascribe to one religion anymore, but I still feel deeply spiritual. And I wanted these women to be able to explore that journey, the sort of waxing and waning, in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Cressyda was raised in religion and comes back to, when she left, her uncle Pius was this joyful man who was a deacon in the church and did wonderful things with music. And when she comes back, music isn't allowed. So she comes back to something that she can't recognize. Meanwhile, Casandra, as an acolyte in the church, or the sanctuary as we call it, she has been there the whole time, and the changes have been gradual and subtle. And even though as an adult she's starting to realize that what she and her brother do for the church is more pageantry than actual, and service to a community. She has a lot of trouble recognizing what has happened. The deacon doesn't want to acknowledge it, even though he sees it. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm not trying to, castigate or judge any religion, but I think it can be an allegory for any sort of groupthink. Sometimes when things change around us, it's very difficult to lift up our head and look around and see what's happening.
And it's easier for someone like Cressyda who has gone away and then come back. And so, the changes weren't for her gradual.
Yes.
For her, they're kind of just smack right in the face.
Exactly.
Because things have changed so drastically. In terms of, now, we've mentioned before that we are friends. I've known you for almost 20 years now.
I know.
That's just, wow. So because I know you and I know you're from Montana and currently live in the Seattle area, I just assumed that the city was Seattle and that New Charity was somewhere in Montana. Was I imagining that sort of correctly?
You are. I didn't put New Charity anywhere in particular. I wanted it somewhere east of the Cascades. Mm-hmm. Seattle, has a lot of the same characteristics as the unnamed city. We do run on a lot of hydropower, and there's an ocean, close by. Mm-hmm. The Puget Sound, which is not exactly the ocean, but there's a lot of water.
Yes.
So I wanted the places to be, less important than the story, so I didn't really want to name anything. Mm-hmm. I sort of went back and forth between putting in any contemporary or references at all, but I ended up doing it in the end. But yes, I really felt comfortable with both settings, thinking about what Seattle would look like, living downtown after, the lights go out. How would you stumble around and what would it look like? Mm-hmm. I'm a huge fan of, sort of the television shows that are disaster narratives. What do cities look like 10 years after the apocalypse?
Right.
But Montana, sort of the whole small town on the plains. I love that imagery as well, and it was really easy to visualize. It's an amalgamation of all of the places that I've ever loved in Montana, really. It's an amalgamation of, the place where I grew up and the camp that we worked at together, mm-hmm. and probably Chico Hot Springs and a bunch of other places.
Nice.
So, that dry and dusty wonderfulness, and thinking about, how having so much water, changes the landscape like that. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of it was when Adam and I drove to your wedding, which up in northwest Montana, mm-hmm. there is a section heading to the town that you grew up in where you are in dry and dusty, and then all of a sudden you come around and there's water, and it's like Eden. It's incredible. And so that was part of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about how New Charity had changed. I was thinking about that landscape and how gorgeous and verdant it was, and how something so small, it was just enough water just changes everything, and how blessed a community might feel if they changed from that sort of arid nothingness to this beautiful green. So mm-hmm. you factored into this book.
I feel so special. Well, my place of origin should feel special. Okay, I have a random question, but if you have an author on the phone, you gotta ask your random questions. So Cressyda's car which is a Cressyda, is almost its own character.
Yes.
And for some reason, I have no idea. I didn't look it up. I have no idea what a Cressyda even is. I pictured your little red convertible from when I knew you in the 90s, but it really is kind of a character in itself. Was that a conscious decision, or was there, what went into that decision to have her drive a Cressyda?
Well, I thought it would be funny because the Cressyda is a silly card. I mean, it's so random. But B, because the bigger part of it is that when I was in college, our American poetry professor was going on and on about the meaning of names and how we needed to be looking up names and their meanings because often they were just imbued with sort of emotion or clues, for example. And he was so offended that Toyota would call a car Cressyda because in Shakespeare, Cressyda is the very definition of inconstancy. She, goes to the rebel camp and her husband accuses her of sleeping with them.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's known as fickle and inconstant and, she's a bad lady. And so why you would name your car after this unreliable person, he went on a tirade that maybe lasted 20 minutes.
Wow.
And so I wanted to show that both the car and the woman had been misinterpreted.
Okay. Now,
if you read Chaucer's version of Troilus and Cressida, he does give her a break. But the Greeks and Mr. Billy Shake, they're not very nice to her.
Right. Okay.
So I wanted to be nice to her because I felt like she did the best she could in a really terrible situation.
Right. Well, and I think you did a really good job of exploring, the deeper meaning or the deeper reasons behind both of the main characters' actions and why they would make the choices that they did. I thought that was very well done. We do actually have to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking more with Camille Griep about New Charity Blues and what she's working on next. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. We have been speaking with author Camille Griep about her book, New Charity Blues. Before the break, we were talking about the importance of names and the character and the car in her story both having the same name of Cressyda and the reasoning behind that. Cammy, is there anything else that you want to say about New Charity Blues that we haven't covered?
The concept of building a family from not only the family that you have, but the family that comes into your life was something that was fairly autobiographical for me while I was writing New Charity Blues.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to show that even though people tend to age and change, sometimes it's kind of the Facebook effect, I think. I remember befriending some of my high school Facebook friends and thinking, oh gosh, I don't really want to befriend them. But I'm so glad that I did, because I learned a lot about people that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they grew up and changed also, and I've made some really great friends and learned about people's lives and opened myself up. I think Cressyda goes through a lot of this. When she goes back to her small town, which she kind of has a lot of preconceived notions and baggage going back to this tiny place after she had this big, exciting city life.
Mm-hmm.
And she's changed by these people that she finds that she loves and cares about. She loses a lot of her own ego and self-absorption. And I think that I hope that it resonates for anybody who's ever felt pulled between a big place and a small place, or one home and another home. That home is made up of people in our lives, not just the place.
Thank you. So what are you working on now, if I can ask?
You can. I started last fall with a concept that I was really in love with, but it's one of those concepts that's really big, and I need to do some more thinking about it. So in the meantime, I'm returning to satire, and my next book is called Virgie's Guide to Hell, although that is probably going... don't hold whatever poor publisher to that, because they'll probably change it. Publishers love to change book titles.
Right.
But Virgie's Guide to Hell is a remaking of Dante's Inferno in sort of a contemporary setting. So I want to look at what a modern hell looks like. So the concept of the Inferno itself is that there are two sort of places a human can be, and that's this, the city of God. And it's not that this will be particularly religious, but the city of God versus the city of man. So you're either focused on yourself, or you're focused on this higher power. So because hell is the city of man, I want to sort of examine sort of the accidental self-absorption that we have kind of as a society. So it'll investigate Virgie, who's a female Virgil. It's actually Virgil's great grandniece or something. And she's a poet who's stuck at the admissions desk of hell as a tour guide.
Oh dear.
And,
that sounds awful.
And the characters that she will meet will hopefully teach her a bit about her own journey. So I'm really looking forward to writing it. I called my agent, and I was like, well, I was working on this one thing, and I really want to work on this other thing. My agent is wonderful, and she told me to just write what I have to write. So.
Well, after I read New Charity Blues, I wrote on your Facebook wall that your brain is a very weird place. And I meant that as a compliment, because it's it is kind of a fascinating place. I never quite know what's going to come out next. So it would be fun to be to work with you and be like, okay, which direction are we going in next? Do you have a time frame? I know it's probably not set in stone at this point, but do you have a time frame for when this third book might come out?
I don't. It's not currently, so you can, if you have sold a book, then you are on a very, very tight time frame. But since I haven't shopped this one yet, I am currently on my own time frame. But I'm hoping to be finished with it, in, let's say, 6 months. So after that, hopefully we'd have a better time frame. So it's usually about, once you sell a book, it's usually about 9 months to a year before it comes out. So
So in another 18 months to 2 years, we can have another Skype date, and you can come back and talk to us about touring hell.
Exactly.
Excellent. We have a few minutes left, and I actually wanted to ask you about the project that you mentioned before we started the interview, your San Quentin project. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Back at the Lascaux Review, about 1.5 years ago, our editor sent a piece to us, and he said, this piece is really fantastic, but it needs some work. By the way, the submitter is in prison. And so I said, okay, I'll take it. And I had such a wonderful time working with the writer that I told him if he had any questions or, wanted to talk about writing or, submitting or how the process worked, that I would happy to talk to him about it. A lot of times when you do an editing process with a writer, sometimes you'll have some hurt feelings or some ego. People tend to think that they know what they know and they don't really want to change things. But this gentleman was very receptive, and it was a lot of fun to work with him. And he is honestly one of the most talented writers that I know. His name is Emile de Weaver, and he is in San Quentin right now, and he has a lot of pieces published. He's currently working for me at Easy Street as a columnist. He has a column called Good Behavior, where he writes about being a writer in prison and related subjects. He is starting a project called Prison Renaissance, which I've been putting some time into of late, and you can check it out at prisonrenaissance.org. They are currently working to match incarcerated artists with free artists for the purposes of mentorship and collaboration. So, for example, what happened with Emile and I is that, I started a mentorship relationship, which is now a peer relationship. His publishing credits are as good as mine now, so, and not really a mentor at this point, but these sort of relationships where people can learn how the business works and how to improve their craft, regardless of whether or not they'll rejoin society. Emile will hopefully join us next year, and some of the writers that we're working with at Prison Renaissance will never get out of prison. But the writing and the art, helps to restore their humanity, and that is something that they feel like they can help give back to the communities that they harmed. And so that's been it's been a really interesting process. I would say that before I started working with Emile, that I was still I'm not a conservative person, but I was probably the most conservative about criminal justice in my viewpoints. And since meeting him and understanding what prison looks like for real, not just Orange is the New Black, but for real,
right,
has very much changed my viewpoint of mass incarceration in America, and what needs to happen for us to have a more just system and to prevent cycles of incarceration from occurring. So it's been really wonderful to work with these artists and help them discover and be proud of the things that they can do and explore. There's some great writers, so I'm hoping that I'm an editor there, and I do some web work, and we're just starting out, but we're really looking forward to sort of the call and response with the community. And, so it's really exciting.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have to wrap up for this episode, which makes me sad because I've so enjoyed talking to you. But do you have, can you tell us where we can find you? Websites, Facebook, whatever you want to share.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me.
Thank you for coming.
I can be found at CamilleGriep.com. CamilleGriep.com. Or I can be found on Facebook. Just search for Camille Griep and the author page will pop right up. Or you can reach me at Twitter at Camille the Griep. That's like Robert the Bruce. Camille the Griep. And I'm on Instagram too, where I mostly post pictures of my dogs.
Yes, and they're adorable dogs. I follow you on all of these social media.
So, I'm kind of everywhere but Snapchat. And
Snapchat is weird. I'm just now getting into it because I'm surrounded by interns who use it. So I'm trying to figure it out, but it makes me feel old.
Yes, that's exactly why I feel like I'm finally feeling my almost 40ness.
Yes, I am feeling my over 40ness. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me, Cami. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you again to Cami for joining me. Her books are Letters to Zell and New Charity Blues. Don't forget that you can learn more about all of the GSMC Podcast Network at www.gsmc.org. www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can also subscribe to this podcast and our entire family of podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play. We're all any app that you can download podcasts on, you can find us. You can follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter. We are GSMC_book review at Twitter, on Twitter. And I hope you'll join me again next time. But in the meantime, go get lost in a good book.